Hi everyone, my name is Maximilian. I'm happy to be here and present our work. Thanks for staying late to the last presentation before the next break. The paper title is Can Johnny Be a Whistleblower? A qualitative user study of the social authentication signal extension in an adversarial scenario. And so what is this about? It's about authentication ceremonies and signal, and recently introduced protocol proposal that we tested then in an adversarial scenario. I assume most of you, I guess all of you know what authentication ceremonies are, but just to bring everybody on the same page and to repeat it, when I talk about an authentication ceremony, more generally, we describe with this word a process of comparing public key material when two chat partners or more, but let's say two, want to be sure that the end-to-end encryption, end-to-end encrypted connection is secure, and the other person is really who that you assume that they be. And the interface for this has changed very little in the last years. This is a screenshot of the Signal app, and it looks similar in other apps. You have a QR code that you can scan, or you have some textual representation of the public key material, sometimes called safety number. Now we have a rather new proposal, or at least an idea, I would say, that was picked up again, and this idea is called social authentication. And the idea is to automate the comparison of the fingerprints and use social media accounts to make that happen. That means the idea is to bring the task to something that the user can more easily grasp. And I will omit technical details. You can see the paper for that or the actual protocol proposal. When we have Alice and Bob, and Alice wants to check the connection, then Alice goes and says, hey, please prove that you are Bob. And now what Bob is doing is Bob logs into a platform, for example, example.org, and the example.org now signs the login and the safety number, and Bob can then send both to Alice. You just have to trust me that the cryptographic part works. There are papers about that. And now Bob has a statement that is, Alice has a statement that's something like, okay, hi Alice, I'm the same person who currently has access to the account Bob on example.org, and here's the cryptographic signature of this claim. Alice now has to decide whether Bob and example.org is enough for Alice to decide that Bob is really Bob. And you see that for that to happen, Alice in this case really has to know that Bob is the account of Bob on example.org. And Bob is written with an O and not a 0, and it's not Bob1 and Bob2, Bob3, it's really just Bob. And you can easily see that social engineering attacks are possible now, but also typo squatting, like when you, for example, switch the O with a 0. Previous studies found that the social authentication was a promising candidate. Participants saw it usable and intuitive, and by now there's also a formally verified protocol proposal of that. So we thought it would be interesting and just see how social authentication would actually hold up in an adversarial setting. I mean, at the end, that's the idea of an authentication ceremony. So we wanted to learn about social authentication when the connection is not secure, and then compare social authentication to other authentication ceremonies. And for our study design, we looked into the literature, and it seemed that participants in previous studies also, not only, but also decided based on a risk estimation. So that means we wanted in our study design to have a reason for participants to behave securely and to be able to argue within the study why they did something. So we worked on a plausible scenario that would give the participants reasoning options, the motivation to behave securely, and also importantly allowed us to observe most of the authentication ceremonies. What we came up with was the lab study, and the study took about 1 hour, where the participants should play in a whistleblower scenario. They were tasked to share files about corruption in the government, and they knew that the government would probably do some kind of surveillance. There were 3 journalists they could contact, 3 because we had a within subject design where we had 3 possible authentication ceremonies, QR code, text, and social authentication. What the participants didn't know was that this was a no-win scenario, meaning every connection was insecure, there was always a person in the middle, and so each authentication ceremony, if done correctly, would just fail. To bring another level of motivation, we also offered additional compensation for correct decisions. Meaning in this case, all participants should award all connections to each and every journalist because the connection is not secure. To decide whether that connection is secure or not, we again need some kind of baseline for the participants to know whether it is correct, whether, for example, the number is correct. And for that, we provided them with 3 business cards. All the journalists are made up, we played them, but what is working is the number. And we didn't really restrict it what participants could do, except we said, okay, you can't make a video call, you have to write a text. This is not uncommon. For example, if you want to contact a newsletter, a news site, then they have the same rules there. We wanted the participants to at least try each authentication ceremony once, but we didn't want to tell them to do so, at least not directly upfront. And so we added for each journalist an idea we assumed people would use, a QR code for one, the text of the safety number, and for the last, identifiers on social media platforms. Again, all authentication ceremonies would fail, meaning the QR code scan fails directly, the safety number is just different from the safety number of the chat, and the social authentication, there would be a typo tag, meaning some letters would be swapped or an empty space instead of a dash. We were not really interested in whether participants could find the authentication ceremony, and we didn't want to provide a full tutorial. Therefore, we modified Signal slightly, as others did before, to lead the participants to the authentication ceremonies. There was this red bar, and for every new chat you opened, there was this red bar, and if you clicked on it, then it opened a selection window where you could choose the authentication ceremony you want to do. If the chat was verified, then the bar turns green. That's all it does. Also, very short peek on the UI of social authentication, because this is new. We had to build it for the study. We built a wizard where participants could ask for a provider and optionally an identifier. The idea of the given identifier is that if you input an identifier, you can later, so the app can later decide if the answer you receive is correct or not. So reducing typo spotting attacks, for example. And then just directly warn, this identity proof failed, you expected, you got, please don't contact the person. Okay, so we were interested in how social authentication would hold up in this adversarial setting, and we ran the study with 18 participants, and in total 7 of them failed the scenario in some way. That means at least sent the data to at least one journalist. And we grouped that into 4 themes, and by far the biggest theme is invent comparison, meaning all but one of the participants in this group saw that this authentication ceremony failed, so they saw, okay, this number is different than the one I would expect, and then tried to mitigate that situation somehow. They weren't exactly convinced that the connection wasn't secure, but there could be something going on. And then they, for example, had the strategy to send to the journalist, hey, I'm expecting something, I don't get it, what is wrong? And then the journalist answered something like, oh, well, I had to reinstall Signal, this is my new safety number. And this safety number matched the current safety number, and some participants decided that this is enough. Then we have 2 themes that I would say are most likely an artifact of the study design. We had one participant who just said, okay, I don't know what to do at the end. So they went through the study and did something, but were unsure at the end and said, okay, I will send it to this one. Yeah, that was wrong, but a gamble. And then we had one person who was really stressed during the study, so the situation was overwhelming, and then wasn't really in the right mindset to make a rational decision and then just send it to everyone. And then we had one case where I would say this can be attributed to at least our interface of social authentication. And this is, if you don't give an identifier, then you have to decide whether the identifier you receive is the one you would expect. And this is a yes and no question. And one participant auto-clicked the decision. She doesn't really saw it, and then, yeah, it was just an autoclick, something probably mitigatable by a different interface. Okay, what do we do with that? I would argue that the scenario worked quite well, so it made sense to build a scenario because it allowed participants to reason and to decide, and they did so based on the scenario. The money motivation also, I think, helped. The participant said at least so, although they also said that it was not as important as the scenario, and they always tried to do the right thing. We observed that there are less failures with social authentication than current ACs. I think we have to be a bit cautious with that, for example, the in-band comparison of safety numbers is something that could probably be captured by an interface extension, where when you receive the safety number through the same channel, you get information that says, hey, that's not a good idea, please don't do it, do the following. But at the same time, social authentication seems more graspable to users. They didn't really necessarily assume that there was an attack ongoing, but they said, okay, this is not the identifier expected, something is going on, I don't just verify and I maybe retry social authentication, but that's it. Maybe I change to another method and fail there, but not on social authentication. And at last, I think we just need more research on that, especially on the perception. As we, for example, saw that the provider could play a relevant role. Yeah, in general, I would say the study results at least seem to me that we can be a bit optimistic about the potential of ideas like social authentication. Okay, that's my talk. Thank you. Any questions?